introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
All right. I'm David Kirkland, Associate Professor of English and Urban Education, Deputy Director of Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools at New York University. My research involves youth culture, language, literacy, digital culture, as well as this larger notion of what it means to be, young inside of modern school settings. An ideal learning community. I don't think there's such thing as an ideal learning community, because I think that students vary, and I think the conditions that will promote education among different students will vary. And so I think if we're going to get anywhere close to ideal, right, we have to have the flexibility to embody, to wrap, to change, to transmogrify a classroom space to fit the unique needs of the individuals that are in them. If we think about media is a term, that gets thrown out there, but media has been around for a long time. Any form of communication, any form of articulation is media. So media can be, young people writing on walls. That's media. Or ancient people writing on walls. Or people marking body in order to, affiliate oneself with, tribe. But what we have now is this proliferation of new media. And what is new media? New media is digital and portable technology, writing on cell phones, it's video games. It's the transposition that happens within computers, and the interface between people. So you can, be at once present with your friend who's not there. You can be at once present, in New York City, but at the same time talking about a Jay-Z verse with somebody in China. Because new media gives us that option. New media gives us an opportunity to connect in ways that we've never connected before. The next critical media project is, how do we begin to consume produce the type of media that's gonna, make the world better too. Here, we're not just talking about reading and writing the word in the world. We're talking about just particularly writing, producing, words and worlds, right? What type of world do we want to see? And in place of, the American Apparel ad with the lady's butt sticking out, what do we put there? How do we clothe her? How do we understand her? How do we rewrite that oppression? In ways that interrupt these vicious cycles of, oppression that play out daily. Right? These patterns of oppression that play out daily. And that's what that means. And so this critical media literacy means that instead of, hip hop only being about, bitches and hoes, hip hop now can be about, interrupting the discourse of bitches and hoes, right? Hip hop can, instead of being about just gross materialism, it can be about, interrupting the discourses and ideology that forces capitalism down our throat. Instead of hip hop being about violence, it might now be about peace, right? When we produce it in a different way. Instead of hip-hop being about profanity and languages of put down, how can it be about languages of empowerment? We tell, young urban kids, for instance, that their identities don't matter. We tell them that the way they see the world doesn't matter. The way they construct selves within the world, don't matter. But not only do we negate those identities, we criminalize them. We vilify those identities. So it's more than just ignoring, right? It's more than just discounting. It's this other thing that happens, this transmogrification that happens, right? This vicious, nasty, ugly alchemy that happens. We twist their identities to the most deplorable things. We call them criminal. Not only do we call their identities criminal, we call them deficit. We tell them that they lack, that they can't read. And so we got young black men who read and write in profound ways outside a classroom. When they go into classrooms and we feed them Beowulf, we tell them that they can't read. We call them disengaged readers. Well, how many of you enjoy reading Beowulf when you were in high school? Hell, how many of you enjoy reading Beowulf now? What I see isn't disengaged classrooms, because when I follow those same young people with burgeoning identities outside the classroom, they're reading and writing in complicated and beautiful ways, yet in ways that we fail to recognize and value. They're not disengaged. We're disengaged. We force them into disengaging classrooms. We have disengaged teachers, disengaged texts. We got this construct. We call them failing students. They're not failing. We're failing them. So instead of failing students, we have to begin to imagine how we're failing students. instead of appropriating who they are inside of our classrooms, we impose a set of text on them that we didn't even enjoy reading. Instead of asking them what they enjoy doing, how they enjoy constructing the classroom, who they are in a relationship, to this broader, practice, this participation of learning, we tell them that they need to take a back seat. It's worse than Paulo Freire's blanket notion. We're not just dumping on them. We're not looking at them as blank slates. We're looking at them as dirty slates. We're looking at them as dirty sheets that need to be washed, right? That's how we're looking at them. They're dirty. And they ever feel that contrast of being made illegitimate. And so the things that are legible to them, and illegible, to their teachers, get reinforced by something that's worse. That the teachers, the structure, the construct, writes over whatever they aspire to be. Dampens, darkens, dirties. And so, in addition to ignoring identity, we construct, awful one, Ann Ferguson's work, Bad Boys, the construction of bad black men. Black masculinities is bad. Young men who are expressing typical behaviors because they wear a certain skin, fitted in a certain gender. They get considered certain ways. We got a problem. I mean, there are a few things. I think your question is full. I want to unpack it, and it's a really good question, right? We live in a context that's not racially innocent. Critical theorists argue that whenever you enter into a classroom space, you're entering into a contested space. It's a political space, imbricated by the various interests, that compete, for a particular type of influence, a particular type of power. And usually the influence of the elite, the interest of the elite gets served in classroom spaces. And usually those interests are maintained, through a variety of oppressions, through misogynies and sexisms, racisms, and economic oppression. Any type of system of power, from ability to age. And hip-hop becomes, something that legislates against the interest of the elite. So it's not in their interest to buy into it. So they create, counter-ideological or dominant ideological narratives against hip-hop. Let's go into this thing about standard English. Is standard English and standard English? No. Standard English isn't standard English by its own rules, because you can't take a noun and modify a noun in standard English. An adjective modifies a noun, but we know that standard, the case of standard in terms of parts of speech, is noun, and the case of English is noun, and a noun can't modify a noun. But why can you break a rule? And there are other rules that get broken. Like, I can friend you on Facebook. Friend is a noun that now becomes a verb. I can chair your committee. A noun that now becomes a verb. Right? So certain people get to break the rules, and certain other people don't get to break the rules. The question here is, who gets to break the rules, and to what effect? We understand that language is an evolutionary process. And language is a tool that should do work for people, in a sense that people use language, and it's not language that uses people. However, when it comes to certain languages that get outlawed because of a misogynistic, patriarchal, Western white supremacist, ideology, status quo, interest set, right? We know that certain languages, do in fact get governed. And we know that the idea, the values that get associated with language are to a moving target. And so certain disruptions of whatever standard is, as long as they modulate along the lines of the elite, they become acceptable. And as long as, or at least as far as they modulate along the lines of, the marginal, they get outcast, they get outlawed, they get deemed not only non-standard, but broken, incorrect, and all other types of pejorative, signifiers. That becomes a big problem, especially inside of classrooms where we have students who come from homes where this language is spoken. We have students who live lives, participate in friendship groups where this language is spoken, where we have students who make sense of themselves, who make sense of the world based on that language. What we're saying to those students is that, they're not only is their language illegitimate, we're saying that the way they see the world is illegitimate. We're saying to those students, not only is the way their grandmother's speaking illegitimate, we're saying that they are, by virtue of relationship to their grandmother, illegitimate too. And in the classroom where, it takes this, where the idea of legitimacy is prerequisite to learning, we're saying that certain people aren't worthy of learning. And so we create the conditions of educational inequity. We create the gap that we go and talk about and blame the student for existing in. We put you in a hole and then we blame you for being there. We believe that Shakespeare should be taught in school because for some reason Shakespeare has this, alchemical, magical power to enlighten our minds. Well, I ask you, how many of us will get jobs based on our knowledge of Shakespeare? Very few. How many of us will use Shakespeare once we leave the classroom? Very few. Now, I'm not badgering against Shakespeare. I like Shakespeare just like the next one, right? At least some of it. But I'm arguing that the same thing that you can learn by learning Shakespeare, you can learn from hip hop. Well, if that's the case, if you can learn, chiasmus from hip hop, if you can learn alliteration from hip hop, assonance, consonants, if you can, learn a deep critical reading by reading hip hop texts, as deep, if not deeper, than you can by reading Shakespeare, why is it mandatory that you take Shakespeare and not mandatory that you take hip hop?
2, 3, break!